Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Robert Prevost and Ryan Paul Tremblay. Again, it is time for the Midnight Society Science Team to link up in the darkness of the Fox Den for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Yeah, please, I really do need to eat. Much better. Absolutely delicious. And now, without further ado, it is time for the Wendigo guy, Robert Prevost, and myself to take a walk into the madness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf. And everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, again, it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy on LordeStarfox Radio. We have Robert Prevost and the Wendigo guy, Ryan Tremblay, from the Midnight Society Science Team. They've already snuck in to set up the late night fire as we burn the timber, again, into the early hours of the morning. Robert, how you doing, my guy?
I am doing awesome. How are you guys doing?
Excellent to link up with you again. I'm glad you're doing pretty well. I'm busy as always, but it happens. And Tremblay, my guy, how are you?
I'm doing exceptional, man. I've been super busy. I'm working on a Gugweek article for Gwendolyn Purcell's magazine. So anybody who subscribed to that will be able to read that next month. So that's been keeping me pretty busy, along with my Skinwalker book, and I started my Cherokee mythology book as well. So it's going. I'm trucking along with my books, man.
It's great stuff right there. Heck yes. Seemingly everyone is pretty busy. And like I said to the audience, we will always get out our content that we do participate with others. It just sometimes isn't as easy to get things out. Yet, don't worry. That knowledge is rolling up in here. As always, Mr. Prevost and the Wendigo guy came up with a brilliant topic tonight that, yes, I have heard a decent amount about. I did try to reach out to a journalist that covered this a decent time frame ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago after Fairchild. I have yet to actually have a response yet. If you don't know somebody on Facebook and they message you, a lot of times it goes into the spam box. If people don't want randos, sending you messages, a lot of times they don't check that good old spam box. She might not even be hating. She just might not have seen it. So I do hope to get her on at some point. Yet I will let Robert do a nice little introduction on the topic we are going to talk about. Yet before then, to make you both chuckle and go ahead and hate on me for sure, being a creature feature individual here, I always love watching stuff. Never seen the Monster Squad. It was on Prime. I watched it.
Yep.
Not really a fan, man. It's okay. I just kind of found myself disappointed.
Oh, what, Kenny? Oh, that's it. You're fired.
Ryan, that's it. Let's go.
That's it. You know what? We're done. We're stepping off. No,
Yeah.
that movie was so great, though.
I mean, I'm down with that type of stuff because I love Goosebumps and, the old school ones. And I definitely like the Goonies and things. I don't know, just from all the hype I had heard about it. Don't get me wrong, like the props and stuff look super cool. And I do think that one of the, sisters, Phoebe, she's hilarious. And the dude that is always smoking butts in the leather jacket is the man. It's got some, cool things to it, but I just didn't find myself as engaged and excited to watch it as I was per se getting caught up on like True Blood or Supernatural. I don't know.
Well, I think you went into it expecting a horror movie, but it's really a comedy. You have to remember that it was made for kids in the 80s. So that was the big monster kid era, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And they need to make it comical, comedic. So parents would say, oh, well, it's a wholesome movie. And there's so many lines in there. I mean, the Wolfman has nards. Come on.
Yeah, that was hilarious. I'll give you that. And yeah, some of the language the kids are using, you're like, holy Christmas trees. How is this even okay? In the 80s, you were dropping words like that. My parents would have curb stomped me.
The 80s were so different, Kenny. You didn't grow up in the 80s, but saying things like nards, your parents would be like, whatever. They didn't care. Yeah, we did say those weird things like bogus, like Frankenstein's monster did say. So I love the scene at the end, though, with the blonde chick, and he's like, you're not a virgin, are you?
See, the thing about those movies like that, when you get into the Goonies, Weird Science, Fright Night, different things like that.
Those are all dope.
You almost need to watch them when they were new, because you had to be a part of that generation, a part of that culture, a part of that society at the time to really get how big of a deal they were. They're still good to reminisce. I mean, that's why we go back and we watch things, like I said, like Fright Night, Silver Bullet, stuff like that, because they hold sentiment with us. Yes. We'd remember the first time we saw them, what we were doing, where we were at, which theater, what we were eating, whether it's popcorn or whatever. And, so there's a lot of sentiment that goes along with that. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of like my generation, Ryan's generation, going back and watching the old black and white movies and really seriously taking them serious, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, and stuff like that. But I mean, we're monster nuts, so we do love those movies. But I mean, as far as the, oh my God, that's so scary, like it was back in the 40s and 30s and 50s when they came out. No, we're not doing that, but I mean, we love the movies. So it's kind of like you're watching it out of time and out of when you should have seen it.
Yep. I'm so glad you mentioned Creature from the Black Lagoon too, because I watched that with my friends the other night. Mm-hmm. And one of the ladies that was there, she's like, I don't understand why the monster was going after that girl. And I was like, because Julia Adams. That's why. I mean, look at Julia Adams during the 50s. That was hubba, hubba. So I mean, I was on the creature side, I was on the Gilman side when he was trying to take her away to his underground grotto. I'm like, me too, Gilman, me too. I'm with you, brother. I am with you, you finned bastard. I'm totally on your side.
Makes perfect sense.
It does to me anyway. To my odd mind, it does make 100% complete and total sense.
I know that they had talked about recently, I don't know what director it is, but he's worked on some pretty decent movies, and he expressed interest in it and has written a plot for it, and more or less is just waiting on a response. But they're trying to make a, not a remake, but a nod to the Creature from the Black Lagoon, more or less.
Oh,
that scares me.
It does. I mean, the only good remake was The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro.
Yes.
That was a great remake of the Wolfman story, but they're not going to do it properly with Creature from the Black Lagoon. They're going to do something that's going to totally mess it up and make some political or societal message. It shouldn't have that. Monster movies aren't about society. Monster movies aren't about politics. They're about the monsters. They're about the chaos, the creature running amok, and the people not able to stop the monsters. That's what it's about.
You know what's funny, too? The remake, actually, I enjoyed it that you just mentioned. I'm a big Rotten Tomatoes person to see if I'm going to waste my time on something. Sure. Rotten Tomato hates that movie. The audience didn't seemingly give it that much love either, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Well, it's funny because a lot of those movies like that, where you get a bad review on Rotten Tomatoes, ends up being what we call those cult classics, where there's a specific group who just absolutely adores them. You know, there's a lot of movies
Mhm.
that have fallen into that.
Makes sense, like you said, yeah, because it seemingly, I don't always go by that. It does give me a little bit of a judgment call.
This is a lost art form. You can tell we lost something, in the recent years. Because in the 80s and the 70s, dude, there were so many good werewolf movies. Then the 90s we started slipping off, and then current day, we just have no idea what to do with werewolves anymore.
They're the worst, yeah, out of that horror genre. And even to be quite honest, yeah, sure, American Werewolf in London and The Howling are cool, but if you look at other horror movies, they don't even stand up to how much love others get. Meaning, Alien, for example, is going to be listed as way scarier, way more creative, and yet, yeah, sure, it's kind of cool. Same thing with like The Predator. I don't feel like werewolf movies. There's plenty of vampire movies that are always going to be talked about, but yeah, werewolves are like the weakest of the group, even though they shouldn't be. But it just takes too much. People either go right to the CGI, or then you got to try to deal with animatronics and costumes and things. And yeah, man, it's just a big mess.
It's that way, Kenny, because a naked American stole my balloons.
That's so funny.
Anyway, I think a lot of the problem is that we put too much into the effect of what the monster is going to look like, and so much time of the monster actually being on screen that we take away from the story, we take away from the characters, the character building. A lot of the old black and white movies, you really didn't see the monster that much. And whenever you look at, like you mentioned, Alien, really, you didn't see the monster that much. It was more of the suspense. You had the dark ship, you had the water dripping, you had the lights flashing, you had Sigourney Weaver being scared, you had, you were in tight quarters. There was all this stuff going on that you were in this. Yeah, exactly. And you were in an alien environment, so you were already set up in a situation where you're going to be afraid. And it was around every corner there could have been this monster, and when it finally shows up, you were already at ease.
Jaws too.
Yeah, Jaws, same way. You go back to the old black and white movies, and most of your really successful, good, scary movies, the ones that have you on the edge of your seat, you really don't see the villain, the monster, that much.
Like Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
You don't see Pamela Voorhees for a good minute, not till like maybe 15 minutes till the end.
Yep.
Isn't it kind of like that with, again, I don't like these type of movies, but Freddy in the first one, you don't really see him as much as you do in the later ones, right?
He didn't have much screen time at all. So
right.
Yeah, then they jump on the whole like crazy aspect. Humorous real quick again before we toss Robert the mic so that you two can educate the heck out of us. A lot of people don't realize that Friday the 13th and Jason are actually technically separate, meaning there's a legal battle going on right now because, yes, Jason Voorhees was never in the first Friday the 13th, as you both had mentioned, right? But yes, that term Friday the 13th is owned by the people that created that, and they no longer want their franchise embarrassed, more or less, right? But the problem is, the other side is like, nah, you don't own Jason, though. Jason Voorhees didn't come around till pretty much the second one. Well, technically, there is no Friday the 13th without Jason. So that's why one of those hasn't been put out in a while, because they're trying to figure this out.
Well, that's for the best, though. I think Jason Voorhees has run his course.
Yeah, please. Yep. Yes.
Yeah, he's not scary any longer. I mean, like, Freddy's not scary either. We all have that fond affection for Freddy now. And I think a lot of movie studios make that mistake. You allow your slasher, your main villain, to become adored and loved by the public. They shouldn't love them like that. They should be afraid of them. So when kids love things like Freddy Krueger, it's like, you dropped the ball. Yeah, you did something wrong there.
Honestly, I think the age of the slasher movies of, stuff like that is really over with. You see people, a lot of movie studios trying to repeat that and collect on that, and I just don't see it. I don't get it. I don't see them being anywhere near as popular or ever even getting close to being as popular as those were in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Even in the early 2000s, they were starting to drop off.
Lightning in a bottle.
Yep. Yep.
People just seep it up, though. Still, it is what it is, right? Kind of how the things we deal with here, just off the wall. Mr. Prevo, well, we are all going to take a nice little dance here. I'm going to toss you and the Wendigo guy the mic, and we are going to start talking about a facet of the whole Dogman aspect, but also potentially it might not and maybe shouldn't be woven into the Dogman topic as much as people perceive it.
Okay, so our subject for tonight is Bearilla. So Bearilla comes from Kentucky, around the Mount Sterling area, Clark County, which is not far from the Daniel Boone Forest. It's really been made famous by a gentleman by the name of Ron Coffey, who spent over 40 years studying Bearilla. He actually had a encounter with Bearilla whenever he was younger. Let me back up a little bit and tell you about Bearilla. Bearilla was seen, I think it was, I'm going to get the time wrong, 1972, was seen by a farmer who described the creature as looking half like a bear and half like a gorilla, and kind of like a werewolf. So that's why this kind of falls within the whole Dogman thing. So approximately 6 foot tall, or around 2 meters tall, black with silver in the hair, long arms that were longer than the legs, and travels on 2 or 4 legs quite easily. In 2012, it was seen by Afton Fairchild talked about tearing the face off of cattle for sport and not to eat. In 1981, now this is where things start to link in. They actually talked about in 1981 a fatal attack. The fatal attack they were talking about, which is really kind of funny, is the LBL massacre. It took me a little while to dig in there and really get to figuring out what they were talking about. But it was actually the LBL massacre, which is highly debatable because there's no evidence to prove that one way or the other. But Ron Coffey and his wife Lori Coffey run Gateway Paranormal, and they are the primary go-tos on Bearilla. Bearilla has been very closely linked in with Dogman because it really fits in with the description of Dogman. All right, what you guys think?
You know, it's interesting when you mentioned how it was ripping the face off the cattle. My mind went instantly to the Gugwi, the face eaters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that would fit the description too, though. I mean, if it's got more like gorilla-like arms where they're longer than the legs, that's more a primate. That's not really a canid thing. You know, because I mean, there's not really many canids that have, you know, longer forelimbs than the hind limbs.
That is true. But we do have to take into account that has been reported several times on Dogman eyewitness accounts, where even when it was on 4 legs, you know, it kind of has that hyena look where the front legs seem to be a little bit longer than the rear legs. So take it or leave it. I mean, it's something in the description. And they did say it traveled quite well on 4 legs and then was able to travel equally as well on 2.
Interesting. Did they ever describe the digits at all? Like what the fingers were like, what shape they were?
Nope. There was nothing about that. They did talk about that they had found tracks, but there was never anything else. It's kind of like with a lot of the Dogman stories. Oh yeah, we discovered tracks. And then I'm like, hold up, where are they at? Could we see them?
Right.
You know, and nobody ever goes any farther than that. It's just we found tracks.
Yeah, and we need to see those prints. We need to see the tracks so we can kind of start deciphering what species this comes from.
Yeah. That is true. So yeah, Bearilla really popped up around 1972, and a little bit before that, possibly. There's a lot of Native American accounts similar to something like Bearilla. One problem I did have with Ron Coffey's research in that is he did make a reference to two of our most fond things being similar, and that was the Wendigo and and the Skinwalker. He did a double whammy. He threw both of them under the bus on this. And no, not.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say you're wrong. You're horribly, 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 horribly wrong. Wendigo was never described as a fur-bearing mammal. Okay. The one thing that it does represent, like you mentioned, Robert, was the Cherokee's belief in the Ulanga Doglala. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it is a werewolf-like entity, but I wouldn't call it a werewolf per se, because it doesn't involve a man or a woman being cursed or bitten or scratched and changing shape. The Ulanga is a spiritual entity that will show up. It'll stalk the hunters. They can smell its rancid breath. They see its red glowing eyes. But what sets it apart from the werewolves, the skinwalkers, the dogman, all that stuff, the Ulanga can change into a human-like zombie. So it goes from wolf form to human zombie form. You know, that right there would make it more supernatural, make it more of an entity. But now I'm very mad at that guy for even saying it's a Wendigo or a skinwalker.
Yeah, and I don't think he's the first. I think, especially with the Skinwalker, I don't know what the deal is with why everybody assumes that, if you see this werewolf-like thing in the forest, it has to be a Skinwalker. And I guess we have to blame media and, the other podcasters and things like that. I don't know. But, those who are misinformed, because you're taking the Skinwalker and you're just limiting it to this werewolf form, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And the Skinwalkers actually were able to make themselves look like other animals.
Absolutely.
So it's like it's like you're bastardizing the whole aspect of it.
Well, I think it's because, skinwalkers, the Yinararushi, they're a cool concept to those outside the Dene tribe. You hear about something magical like that, and your mind starts running with it, going, wow, that would be terrifying. They say they look like this or they look like that. So when you see something along those lines, it's automatically going to go to that horror movie element. And you're going to be like, oh, it's a skinwalker. And you don't really know anything about them. I don't think enough people scratch beneath the surface and look into things before labeling it as something. And that's something that's got to change eventually. We have to make the strides to change that and get people to look into this and know what they're dealing with.
I agree 110%. I think it's the same thing that has happened with the creepypasta stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The creepypasta, people hear about it and these different creatures or whatever that they've come up with, internet literature or whatever you want to call it. And, it gets completely blown out of proportion and, people make it real in their own minds. A lot of people who are not very sound minded in the first place.
Sure.
Get a little carried away with it, and things just take on a life of their own, which is because of us, not because of these things actually existing.
Yeah, well, I think also, because things like skinwalkers, they're taboo, okay? Yeah. And it takes a lot of work to actually start learning about them from the people that started the legends, and I don't think a lot of people know how to go about that, so you could spoon feed them pretty much anything if they don't want to learn, and it's sad, but I don't want to digress too far from the conversation here.
Yeah, you and I tend to have that conversation quite often.
Mm-hmm.
But Bearilla. So Bearilla is kind of a local name. It's kind of like, the Momo in Missouri, or, the creature in Boggy Creek. And, so it's most likely, and, we're looking in Kentucky, but we're most likely looking at something that's close to or is what we consider a dogman, or, as you said, possibly a gugwe.
Could be. It could be. There are gugwe being seen in the States. I don't know if it's due to popularity. I don't know if maybe people are learning and they're going, oh, this is what I saw. It wasn't a canine. It's a type of primate. So, 50-50. It could be either or.
Right. Kenny, what do you think about all this?
Well, that's some pretty gnarly stuff for sure. A couple things like you both were saying about how everyone's always messing things up. Here's one for you. I happened to unmute my TV while I was working on something. I happened to be watching a friend's podcast. Then it flipped me into some other stuff. As I unmute my TV, this woman's talking about Dogman being the same thing as Ohio Grassman. Wait, what? No, that's not. Jody actually was the one that began using that term, and that's 1000%. I don't even like dealing in 100s, but we're going to go to 1000 here, pump it up a couple notches. Not meant to be a terminology tied in with Dogman, as you had both been complaining justifiably about how people are mixing those up. It's no different than the whole skinwalker aspect, too, though. I mean, last time I checked, skinwalkers seemingly are actually more involved with coyotes than wolves, which is a wrong depiction. And also, again, never once do they say you're a raging werewolf by any means, he or she on all fours, etc. Again, mixed in with werewolves and raging beasts. It's a totally separate aspect. Kudos on both of you for acknowledging that. Back into some of the other things you both had mentioned. Big fan of Afton Fairchild. Yeah, she has some great things that she covered about this, and I would love to get her on at some point. So great acknowledgement by Mr. Prevo there. Another thing I've realized, spoken to other people about, New Age wolves, coyotes. Well, there's a problem now that they've been not necessarily domesticated, but they are mating with domesticated dogs. If you look at, for example, domesticated cat or domesticated dogs, they're fed and such, but they will unalive something just for sport or fun. Now that that's being mixed in with wolves, experts are seeing this in areas where they're not even eating anything now. It's just like they were more or less unaliving something because you were too close to me, or they just enjoy it, or they just shred it like a dog shreds its toys and things around the house. It's a behavior that wouldn't normally be entwined into nature because they are always going to be worrying about expended calories. Yet when something's been domesticated, it's going to take a while for that bloodline to kind of be faded out again, you know?
That's true. Very true.
Mm-hmm. Now, are we looking at this as wild feral animals, or are we looking at them as people keeping them as pets? What are we looking at?
Again, that is something I think both you two, being scientists and being part of the science team, are going to have more to say on that than I think I'm going to have to say. But I do have another interesting aspect that was shared with me, meaning if you do look at some versions of Sasquatch and how they're described, maybe even looking as they're younger, some sort of teddy bearish like, right? When people are saying they're seeing bear man, there's a decent possibility that it really could be a Sasquatch as well. From the back, would that not look like a bear man? Meaning same thing with the Dennis Martin case or etc. I don't know.
All right. Well, I mean, something that you have to remember is with like indigenous Bigfoot, okay, they're not going to call things a monkey or an ape because those words, they weren't in their language at the time. And things like bears, wolves, they were a part of their wildlife. They saw them on a daily basis, and they had their own terminology for them. Okay, so calling a Sasquatch a bear man is because they're comparing it to something they already know.
Yes.
So when they're telling stories of Sasquatch that has a snout, for example, they may tell the other people in their village, in their tribe, I saw a bear man. He was walking upright. He had the snout of a bear and the ears and fur of a bear. It's not because he looked just like a bear. It's because he had features that were similar, and they were comparing it to what they already knew. And we have to look into that. That's something that I keep pushing onto everybody I go onto shows with. When you're talking about the indigenous Bigfoot, look at the details. You get to really scratch beneath that surface, overturn every stone, and look at how they describe them. So
okay, all right. So let me clear this up a little bit when we're talking about Bearilla. It has been described with a muzzle, not a short muzzle, a longer muzzle, and pointed ears, tall pointed ears, what we're looking at whenever we're talking about Dogman. So the criteria is fitting directly in with Dogman. It's just, like I said, it's just simply a local name that was given to it before Dogman popped on the scene and became this popular thing.
And I still lean a lot towards that Ulongo Doglala, though. That sounds a lot like that. Because the Cherokee spoke about that long before there were white settlers here. And if it looks anything like that, then maybe it's a spiritual thing that these people were dealing with, that they were seeing. That would explain the small amount of sightings. It's not a frequent thing where people are seeing Bearilla every day. We don't get all these reports where, hundreds of people are seeing that same thing. It's so scant, so few. So it makes me wonder if like the spiritual energies have to be aligned. and this thing shows up on certain times of the year, and maybe there's even a time gap where it can only show up certain times.
I mean, I agree with you. Playing devil's advocate, I could say the same thing about Dogman. Dogman doesn't pop up all the time and in the same area all the time. So, I mean,
Sure.
there's all I can say is, okay, here's the information that I was able to gather on Bearilla, and it was pretty interesting. And when I look at it, it really does fit in with the whole Dogman thing. Could it possibly be a Gugway? Yes, it absolutely could possibly be a Gugway. Could it possibly be a Sasquatch or something else? And it could possibly be that the entire story is baloney. So I mean, there's all kinds of things that are possible out there. So, but if we're going to look at what the eyewitness evidence or eyewitness accounts, I won't say evidence, eyewitness accounts are telling us, according to their description of Bearilla, it really does fit in with the Dogman.
Again, that's why I always try to link up with you and get your opinions on things. I think it's interesting. I mean, I was just more or less potentially, again, playing devil's advocate, but it seems that it definitely has a very different depiction, more or less, if they're seeing it from the front like that. I guess I was maybe making a reference on the back a little bit more. Something saw some, from the backside, whereas a bear man doesn't seem like it's got a tail, but in the majority of the Dogman ones, they do have a tail. Very interesting stuff. And we do know, as far as reports go, it doesn't seem like a Bigfoot or Sasquatch has a tail. Yet they're saying this looked like a bear man. As far as I know, people should know a bear doesn't have a tail.
Right.
And
we don't want to get too hung up on the bear aspect of this. This is something where, you had farmers in the area who probably don't see wolves in around Kentucky, and it didn't look like a coyote. So they were like, okay, it kind of looked like if you crossed a bear and a gorilla, that's what this thing looked like, or it kind of looked like a werewolf. So try not to get too hung up on the bear aspect or the gorilla aspect of it, but it was just kind of something that they were like, okay, well, it kind of looked like if he stuck these two animals together, that's what it would look like. Not necessarily that it specifically looked like a bear. It just had that muzzle look and it had the ears.
Yeah, it's comparing something, that you already know to something that you don't know. That makes sense. I get why people do that. But I do have a question, Robert. Did they ever describe what the eyes were like, or any eye shine or anything like that?
Yes, actually, there was several accounts of the glowing eyes, which is kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I've been going down a little bit of a biological or theoretical biological rabbit hole about glowing eyes, self-illuminating eyes. And I've been kind of trying to piece together some stuff, and I'm not really anywhere definitive yet, but okay, so we have the same thing that happens with Sasquatch, where there are times where people report self-illuminating eyes, not eyes that are reflecting any light of any kind. It's just there's this thing out in the forest and it's got bright illuminated eyes. And so we know about the tapetum lucidum, which is in the back of the most eyes of most animals, that especially those that are nocturnal. Essentially, it's like a concave mirror at the back of the eye that is able to reflect all that light and gather it and push it into the cones and rods so that the eyes can see better, pick up more light. So humans don't have that. Not in that regard. We have it, but it's not very strong, because we're not nocturnal. However, if there was a version of us that, spent more time nocturnally, that would have evolved. But there is another possibility that we're looking at too, and I'm throwing together some ideas here. So if these things are primarily nocturnal, for one, and maybe partially subterranean, because we keep going back, all of us keep going back to maybe these things get down in caves and move around. And we talk about how they're able to avoid game cameras, because I know I've put tons of game cameras out in our research area and we haven't gotten anything yet. And other people have got the same thing. Well, those game cameras run off of IR lights, and that is simply an infrared. Now, most animals, we think, can't see in the infrared spectrum. But what if you could? What if you were a living mammalian organism who could see in a infrared spectrum? Not a reptilian, because we know that reptiles can. Certain reptiles can, especially those with heat-seeking pits.
Yes.
So they don't actually see in that, they sense in it. They've got a completely different organ. But what if you had organs in the eyes or behind the eyes that could actually alter the way you see so that you could pick up in the infrared? That would be very interesting. So if you look at the eye shine or the illumination, and you look at the evasion of IR cameras, and you look at a couple of those other different things, it kind of starts to link together that maybe there is something very special about their eyes, and maybe there is something that we're not putting the pieces together when we have several of the jigsaw puzzle pieces right in front of us.
A very scientific approach there, Robert. Like, maybe you're onto something there. I keep coming up with different ideas, and for some reason the roads always lead me back to the paranormal part of it all. And I think that's something that could be a possibility. I do think there are some spiritual aspects to some of these things, but I think the way that you're going about it, I think you might be onto some stuff there. You get some pretty good ideas.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, if it's not that organ that I'm theorizing or hypothesizing, then it leans towards the supernatural or the paranormal. It has to be one or the other. So if we're going to attempt to omit the supernatural and the paranormal, then we have to figure out how are we going to account for it in the biological. So if we're going to do that, then what would account for it? And the only thing I can think of is that there is some form of vision that they have where they can utilize infrared vision, and they have the ability to basically turn it on, turn it off, which is not that far-fetched. It's really not.
No. I mean, bioluminescence of any sorts, especially in a land animal, it definitely begs the question as to how and why they have it. So I think that's going to be something that we're not going to be able to answer until we actually have a living specimen. It's unfortunate, and I know people get mad when they hear about capture or, finding a corpse of one, but those are really the only means we're ever going to get answers to questions like this.
That is true.
I know it bogs people down and it gets them really angry, but unfortunately, that is the way things work.
That is true. And, this would also, let's say they are subterranean, and I don't know if anybody in here has ever been down in a cave that is completely black.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been down in Mammoth Caves, and they turned out all the lights. You want to talk about completely black. You have never experienced complete blackness till you've been in a cave like that.
Yep.
What if you're needing to be able to move through a cave? You have no abilities to illuminate, and you need to be able to see. Well, the tapetum lucidum is only going to work so well if there is ambient light. If there is no ambient light, then what are you going to do? There's another possibility in here too. That way you can see one another, and maybe even there is something going on with the color hues that we can genetically tell. That's my kid, that's my mom, that's my dad, that's my enemy over there.
Interesting.
So I think there's something more to this illumination in the eyes than we're giving it credit for.
Oh, there definitely is. That's definitely something that doesn't get enough study. And I think when people hear, self-illuminated eyes, it kind of shuts them off and they go, oh, it's not possible. But maybe it is. Maybe there is some kind of possibility through evolution or mutation or whatever you want to call it. But you can't just ignore that. If you want the real answers, you have to look at every little detail and don't dismiss the ones that you don't like.
Right.
So if somebody's talking about self-illuminating eyes, you got to start venturing into it like you're doing, going down that path, going, well, why would this happen? How would it happen? What use would it have? So
now here would be the fly in the ointment, or the next weird part. If that is so, if that is a part of their evolutionary process to have developed something like that, that would have to mean that either other creatures such as Dogman have gone through the same evolutionary process, or biologically they are all related.
Also true. Wow. Way to drop the mic there, Robert. I heard that.
I do what I can.
Excellent stuff by both of you right there. Wow. Is there anything in the near future that you both are working on projects? And is there anything else for the evening you'd like to touch base on before we let you get back to things you need to attend to?
Well, I do have some potential projects coming down the pike. So I have been speaking with some people from the Navajo tribes here in Arizona, and they're considering actually allowing me to go and film near the reservation to show areas where the Yanadalishi have been spotted. I'm possibly going to have interviews with elder members of the tribe to tell the actual stories that were handed down by their grandfathers and their grandfathers before them. And I'm also looking into maybe making a Wendigo documentary once my book hits the shelves. So fingers crossed that both of those work out. And if they do, I'll be bugging you both to be on the documentary or whatever and be like, yeah, Kenny, you're coming on. I know you're the Dogman guy, but talk about
so. Appreciate it, dude. That's legendary.
That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. It was a lot of hard work, man. I mean, people kind of underestimate how hard it was to get this information. And when you read those books, you guys are going to see that I really went out there and people came forward and started talking to me about it. So,
well, I have already set aside a very specific spot specifically for my Tremblay collection once it starts.
Nice. I'm honored, man. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Great stuff right there. What about you, Mr. Prevo?
Oh, well, let's see. We are headed up to the research area tomorrow. The research area in Missouri. Me, the wife, and the dogs. We're going to go up there and make kind of a day of it, see what happens. Maybe do an overnight. I've got to move some cameras around up there. Honestly, other than that, and trying to set up some paranormal research for some local cemeteries. There's not really a whole lot going on right now other than just working on the podcast, trying to up the game a little bit, play around with the algorithms, change some of the graphics, pull in some new guests for in the future, pick up some new topics, just, playing around, tweaking with stuff, seeing if we can get things a little bit better, get things moving. I noticed today I'm up to 770 subscribers, which is fantastic. And like everybody else, I want to hit, that 1,000. So we'll get there. It takes time. I'm not going anywhere as far as I know. I'm not going anywhere. So I'm just going to keep plugging away at it and, putting out the field guide episodes, which I think people are loving. We're still putting out the occasional TikTok episodes, which have been a lot of fun. I'm taking some stuff from other episodes, regular podcast episodes, cutting them down and making little stories and having a little bit of fun with that. So yeah, we're, busy all the time trying to put out some stuff for people to enjoy and, bring in new listeners all the time.
Excellent.
Beautiful stuff by both of you right there. If you ever need guests, for sure, I have a ton of hosts I work with, and I also have some of the hosts or guests I work with that have things elsewhere that they dive into that I don't particularly cover, etc. So I could always gear people in the direction for you as well. And yes, to the audience, make sure you go over and check out the good old links in the description down below. See what both of these great minds are up to. You can also check out the playlists of our previous episodes that we have churned out. Be on the lookout for our newest content. We do link up here bi-weekly with, as we'd like to say, the Three Stooges, right?
Nice guy, eh?
Yeah.
You always be able to find great content. Yes, but for sure, we do need to, unfortunately, allow Mr. Prevo and the Wendigo guy to get back to things they need to attend to as well. You heard them both. They're working on probably just as much stuff as I am. So the editing and the workaholic part never really stops.
No, it doesn't.
Even when you're sleeping, your brain's still thinking, how can I do more of this? How can I come up with this? How can I create that? And you just wake up going, damn it.
Yeah. I'm like that meme where, the guy's laying in bed and the wife's laying there going, I bet he's thinking about another woman. And I'm laying there thinking, I wonder what Bigfoot's doing right now.
Nice.
That was me last night, Robert. I was trying to get to bed, and I'm working on these articles, right, for one magazine. I kid you not, every time I went to go lay down, man, I'm thinking, oh, I could have put this in there. Oh, I could have put that in there. I did not get to bed till 4:30 this morning. I was so mad at myself. I'm just like, you're an idiot, Ryan. Stop being a perfectionist. Just go to bed and shut up.
Yeah. That is the worst part right there for sure.
Yep.
And probably just be happy your wife isn't like Sookie, man, from True Blood. Then you'd be really in some trouble.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be hiding any thoughts then, man.
No. No. Then she'd be really concerned.
I mean, the redhead from True Blood was the best one, though. I mean, you guys can't skip over that. Yeah, you cannot skip over Jessica. That was like, ooh, okay.
Yeah, no, she's definitely dope. I just made this Sookie reference because she reads minds. So that's why it's like you could be just sitting there and be like, oh, I got to go to bed, got to go to bed, got to go to bed. She'd be like, what are you doing, dude?
Just go to sleep already.
Well, I do appreciate you both hanging out with us tonight for sure. To the audience, this will be the conclusion of the meeting of the Midnight Society for the early hours of the morning. Thanks for hanging out again, guys.
Oh, my pleasure, bro.
Anytime.
Ooh, you legends, you, I do adore every single one of you, and thank you for hanging out with us tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, share the facts to the algorithm, and we will catch you very soon.